But the question is not the Rwandan government. The question is, how is it that a small government in Central Africa can possibly develop this sort of power and be protected in this way? When I was in prison, the Congress, the Congressional Delegation of Minnesota, put before the Congress this resolution asking that I be released. And part of that, they put forward this information about over $1 billion of taxpayer-funded assistance given to Rwanda since 2000, $240 billion this coming year. In addition to this, the documents that are in the UN files going back to 2001 show that Rwanda has been occupying an area of eastern Congo 15 times the size of Rwanda itself. They've been stealing resources to the tune of $250 million a year for the last 15 years. They've killed more than 6 million people in the eastern Congo, and you haven't heard about it at all, while Darfur has been made a poster child for crimes against humanity. And I suggest to you that what has happened is that the superpower, the sole superpower, has used international humanitarian law in a way that has fostered and followed and encouraged its own foreign policy in a way that has manipulated the International Tribunal for Rwanda, play favorites in Africa, to support a regime like the Rwandan regime, to give them a pass on all sorts of human rights violations, while at the same time finding ways to prosecute leaders like Bashir of Sudan. Sudan, of course, has arrangements with China and with non-Western corporations as their development source, rather than the arrangements made with Mr. Kagame and the Ugandan and Rwanda development of the Eastern Congo. Now, I would suggest further, if I can tie this up in relation to our domestic situation, I'd suggest to you that the difficulty that a sole superpower has internationally in following the law, because, of course, one of the prerogatives of the sole superpower is to be able to control the law. And if we think about the U.S. in the international arena with its military power greater than the rest of the world combined, an economy that is 5 times or 4 times the size of China, much larger than the rest of the world. It's sort of like this black hole that exercises gravity that influences everything within its sphere. I think that what we can show, and Carla Del Ponte, the prosecutor's book, is very helpful with this, precisely how the international institutions are influenced. I think the ICTR is an extreme example. But I also think that we're faced with a particular problem domestically, because it's only been 20 years that the domestic institutions that we have existed within the domestic context of the sole superpower. We have always existed as a nation prior to that time within a balance of power situation internationally that caused the nation to, in some way, have to respect a balance of forces internationally that required there to be at least a veto on the Security Council that had to be respected. Some sort of limitation, either geographically or in a balance of power, that required some restraint. But as I was thinking about this, it seemed to me that perhaps we are entering a period not unlike the period of the sovereignty of King John before the Magna Carta. Huh. When the sovereign is in a position to exercise its power without limit, when law means virtually nothing because of that power internationally and domestically because of the technology that exists now in predator drones and electronic surveillance and the ability to create laws like material support that run around the First Amendment and that cause so many exceptions to U.S. versus U.S. District Court that we can't even be sure that the statement that a great judge made, as I understand it, that I'm sorry, Mr. Prosecutor, but I've looked at the Fourth Amendment and I don't see anywhere where it says it doesn't apply to Richard Nixon. I'm not sure that that same sentiment would apply in a world where we're told that the battle is here and that the enemy is everywhere. Because terrorism is where we find it, and where we find it is where we're paid to find it, and where the institutions we're creating will find it. And the larger the institutions are that we have to locate it, the surer we are of finding it, because it becomes necessary. And so, my friends, I feel as though I've been given a gift. I'm living on borrowed time, which we all are, of course. I am very lucky I wasn't killed in Rwanda. Of course, I'm not going back to Africa. My lawyers advised me to the contrary. But it's also true that that government has assassination squads all over Africa, and people have been assassinated by them in Europe as well. There's also questions of Interpol warrants, and we're going to have to approach that with the State Department and with the UN and see what we can do in that regard. But it also raises questions about whether any defense lawyer can operate at the ICTR and adequately defend their client. Because it's amazing to have one of the entities that should be prosecuted at the Rwanda tribunal prosecuting a defense lawyer who then can't represent their client at the tribunal, all with the United States saying, sure, we'll let that all happen. So I want to suggest to you that, of course, these elections that we've had recently are a great blow. But I also think there's an optimistic side to it that I want to stress. I'm a great believer in reality. Even if reality is, I'm sleeping on a concrete floor, there's a kid with an AK-47, and Hillary Clinton in 2 days is going to hear from my family, and I got to figure out a way to make it necessary for her to act quickly. That was reality at one moment for me. Reality for us is that we have lived through a time when the United States has elected an African-American president from my part of Chicago. I never thought anyone from the South Side would have been elected to Chicago. I picked up garbage behind Michelle Robinson's house before she knew Obama. People from my part of Chicago don't go anywhere. He's the president. He's a community organizer. I never imagined that in my life. And there was a congressional, a Senate majority that's 60 votes. They could stop the filibuster. And there was a majority in the House. They could pass a national health care bill. But of course, helped out the insurance companies a lot. But imagine that happened. And it's probably the high point in our lifetime. And what was missing was the people's movement to hold their feet to the fire. The people's movement to make them do what their best impulses would force them to do. The people's movement to give them a vision of the society that they needed to bring into being, that they aren't capable of bringing into being themselves because of Wall Street, because of the pressure of the folks who have so much power, they make us look powerless in the short run. But in the long run, my friends, there's only one power that we can depend on. It's not the power of the superpower. We have to be aware of it, because that is reality. However, the power that's the greater reality in the long run is the power we've depended upon since the very early days of the Republic. It's the one that Frederick Douglass talked about. Power concedes nothing without demand, never has, never will. Those who want freedom and justice without struggle are like those who want the crops to grow without the rain. We got to go out and plant some crops. We got to work. To all my sisters and brothers and national lawyers dealing with progressive movement in the United States, I thank you so much for letting me